little brief interruption there with
Yeah,
the phone.
right.
We were talking about
Community corrections.
community corrections.
That what I learned was, and this has never changed, and I've been all over the state, and we built a jail and so forth. There's a huge percentage. I mean, it varies between 65 and 85% of the people who are in the jail at any given time are addicted either to alcohol or to drugs,
Mm-hmm.
and they are guilty of what they call technical rule violations, TRV.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're not talking, or they're awaiting trial.
Mm-hmm.
That in fact, if since this huge percentage is addiction and to either alcohol or drugs is so prevalent,
Mm-hmm.
you would think that we would address that issue.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Because that leads to technical rule violations.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say, which really means a bad urine test.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly,
Yeah.
mostly that's what that means, and or somebody has. I talked to a woman who was in one of the women's blocks, and she had gone through drug court. She had a child. She had gone through drug court. She'd done really, really well. She got out all excited, ready to start a new life. Absolutely could not get any employment.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it threw her. She spiraled down, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I think, of course, is right.
Mm-hmm.
And there did not seem to be an alternative, and she started using drugs again.
Mm-hmm. And
I think, what can you say?
Right.
I mean, now this is an unsuccessful
Mm-hmm.
for her. But my Lord, if she'd found a job,
Mm-hmm.
and that was something I did at Middle Way House, was create jobs for women who were really difficult to employ,
Mm-hmm.
and there are very few people doing that out there.
I know.
And I've gone to many economic development committee
Mm-hmm.
meetings of various levels, in this community, from the big fancy ones to the ordinary, to more grassroots ones, and nobody talks about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I always bring it up, and they always sort of pat me on the head and say, "Oh yeah, Charlotte." I still think that's a critical issue.
It's a huge issue.
And if I had more time, or I could convince somebody to organize this, I think data tell stories.
Oh yes.
And one of the things that we do not understand what people's lives are like who are on the margin. We don't when they're functioning well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I would like to see a task force of people interviewing face to face about 300 single parents,
Mm-hmm.
and just find out from them what they earn, how they spend their money,
Mm-hmm.
and how they spend their time,
Mm-hmm.
and just get those data,
Mm-hmm.
and then you get a narrative that will come out of that. So you have 300 case histories in effect, but they have numbers attached as well as a story, and then compile them, and then go to the economic development people saying, this is data.
Mm-hmm.
It's not me making stories up. It's not just what do you call it? It's not just talk.
Mm-hmm.
It's data. They're data, and we've got to answer that,
Mm-hmm.
because this is driving people into drugs.
Yeah.
You know that.
Mm-hmm.
And making them less productive. Their children are affected by it.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to wake up to stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very easy not to, if nobody tells us the story.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I have like a personal philosophy, which is very simply, everyone needs a purpose.
Yes.
I mean, I just
and
really
you're
feel that.
absolutely right. Everybody needs a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of people, their children turn out to be their purpose, but
Mhm.
they can't They can't
take care of them. I was just talking to someone the other day who had been recently incarcerated and had, was trying to find a job. And she was talking about this time in her life prior to, things falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
And she was saying, I was so proud of myself. I was working 2 jobs. I was taking care of my kids. And I was so happy that I could pay all my bills. And, it's interesting because there are so many people out there who mistakenly think that people just take public service money or public funding just because they are trying to take advantage of a system. The average person, I'm not saying that those people aren't out there. I have ran across a couple in my life.
Sure.
But
I'm sure
it's
there are.
very rare. It is
not,
very, very, very rare. And I also know that there's some trauma. That's what I feel like I want to raise awareness about, is asking, like you said earlier, of course this would happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
That's the message that I'm trying to get across, is like,
Mm-hmm.
of course this is what would happen. Of course she would start to use drugs after, just it's giving up because she has pain.
Yeah, yes.
And so, but this mother, just her face, how she just really lit up. I could see, like, this was so important to her to feel I'm a part of society. I have a purpose. I'm not excluded. And I think that there does seem to be some headway that's having been made in recent years when it comes to understanding the impact of trauma or the impact of pain that people are suffering from early in their life, and they begin using drugs and alcohol not because they make bad choices or they're bad people, or they want to upset everyone. It's because this substances that were devised to manage pain, like morphine, they also cover up emotional pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that a lot of people don't look at. This is a numbing agent. And that instead of asking people what's wrong with you, I think it's important to start asking what happened to you. And because we are a society that loves to blame,
It's interesting because this may be skating on thin ice, but I am the daughter of a Lutheran minister. My entire heritage is Lutheran ministers and their wives. My mother was a Lutheran minister's daughter. Her mother was a Lutheran minister's daughter, married to a Lutheran minister. And my father's mother was a Lutheran minister's daughter. His father was a maverick. He was he was a locksmith, but but his grandfather and his uncles were all ministers. I mean, and his brother was a minister. So I come from an extremely religious or oriented family. And I was taught, I went to parochial schools, to Lutheran schools. And I was taught every morning, love thy neighbor as thyself. And do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And we write that 10 times in your best penmanship, which was never very good for me. But and I I thought that meant something. The fact that we emphasize that daily for years and years and years. And I don't always see that in operation in the society that says that.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And I think that makes me sad and a little bit upset.
Yeah, no, me too. I absolutely agree. And that, I mean, that also, just makes me think about the people who have done unto others what others have done when it comes to, like, this repeated pattern of violence.
Yes.
And how sad and traumatic that is, and how do we stop that?
And how do we stop that?
Yeah, and I think the answer is, and this is also a buzz, is focusing on early childhood, and focusing on education, and focusing on teaching parents how to interact with children.
Yeah, and I think that doesn't come naturally.
No, it doesn't. Especially, there's this former belief. Sorry to interrupt you, but
no, that's okay.
There's this former belief that for many, many years there were a lot of therapists who would say, well, in order to love someone else, you need to love yourself. Well, what if you have never been shown love?
What if you haven't been shown love?
Ever.
You
don't know how to love. You have to learn how to love. And I mean, that's hard to do. That's really hard to learn how to love, and it's hard to learn how to have a relationship if it's never been modeled.
Right. Yes.
Um, and so I think that it's a setup. It's not fair to say or to blame someone for not being able to do what they can't do. So it is hard.
Yeah.
That's why I think that early childhood, like daycare and
Yeah.
having, is so vital to children, because the studies show that if you have one person in your life who just loves
Yeah.
you and cares about you and cherishes you, it does make a difference.
We
It makes a huge difference.
when we came back from Czechoslovakia, and I was my my children, my daughter was in first grade or second grade, and my son was in preschool.
Mm-hmm.
No, yes, preschool, and I didn't have a job, and my husband was busy, and so I looked around for a volunteer opportunity, and I decided to go to Head Start.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to Head Start, and I said, okay, I'm here to volunteer. What do you want me to do? And it was this wonderful teacher. She no longer living. And she said, I want you to sit on the floor and hold the children and talk to them.
Yep, that's beautiful.
And,
That's beautiful.
I can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can do that. She
Mhm.
said, because nobody ever talks to them.
Yes.
And so that's what I did. Twice
Mhm.
a week I went and sat on the floor and
Mhm.
held people on my lap and talked to them, read them books and
Mm-hmm.
chatted. They weren't very good at talking, some of them,
Mm-hmm.
because they obviously hadn't been talked to a lot.
Right.
And we know that that happens with
Yes.
a lot of kids.
Mm-hmm.
And frequently parents don't know what to do. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
And because they haven't had that opportunity.
Right.
And
Right.
so I thought Head Start is really important.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's vital.
And it also shows the parents things that work with their kids.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the hospital briefly once, just overnight, and there was somebody in the room with me, and she had a young son, and she said, he's rotten, he's spoiled, he's rotten. And I said, really? She said, oh yeah, he's really bad. I said, what does that mean? She said, well, he just runs around. I don't know what to do with him. He's just terrible, bad child. And I thought about that, and I thought, that's so sad,
It's very sad.
because I don't believe that, there are people who believe that, original sin is part of the Lutheran doctrine.
Mhm.
So of course that means we're all born sinful, and maybe that's true, but that doesn't mean we're rotten.
Right.
That doesn't mean we're rotten.
Yeah, and she was
And-
probably just living what she had learned.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a lot, and she just couldn't believe that, well, your children weren't born rotten. I said, no, I don't think so. They're not perfect, but they're not rotten,
Mhm.
and they want to do the right thing, but we have to help them understand what that might be, without trying to preach, because I don't like preaching, but preschool is
Very
strongly,
important.
yeah.
So one thing before we wrap up here, I wanted to ask, if you're feel comfortable with this. I was just realized, like, I don't know much about you personally. Like, I know that you were married. How many children do you have?
I have 2
grandchildren?
children.
2? Okay.
Yeah, and they're really nice.
Oh, okay. For the record,
For the
they are
record.
really nice.
They're really nice.
They are not rotten.
They are not rotten. They are not rotten.
That's
Yeah,
terrific.
and they're quite successful.
Oh, wonderful.
They're both lawyers, of all things.
Oh, wow,
Big
wow. I'm
surprise.
sorry. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, no, it was a kind of surprise because there are no lawyers in the family, but they're conscientious, good people.
I love lawyers, by the way.
Yeah.
I know some amazing.
And I wasn't, I couldn't figure out, why are they lawyers? Well, partly because that's,
Well, justice. I can
Yes.
see exactly why they're.
and
lawyers.
also I'm sure I came home regularly and said, oh, I wish I knew more about the law.
Or this is so unjust, or
Yeah, and that, of course. And my husband came from a family of, his father was a minister.
Mhm.
But he
Wow.
was a social justice minister, and his mother was a minister's daughter,
Wow.
actually, in a different denomination, Evangelical United Brethren. But they were all for social justice. I mean, his father actually gave up left the church
Mm-hmm.
and went to work for the National Conference of Christians and Jews in the 30s
Wow.
because he was so upset about the fascism that was growing in this country, and went to Minneapolis and St. Paul and worked with the National Conference there, and ended up in Germany.
Wow, of all places.
With the occupation, setting up Christian Jewish friendship societies in the
middle of that.
the big
Wow.
cities in the American zone, which were like Nuremberg and Munich and Frankfurt and Stuttgart, where there were these Nazi rallies held. And he somehow patched together, I don't know where he found the Jews, but he did.
Wow.
He worked on that until 1952.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. So do you have grandchildren?
Yes, I do, and I have 4 grandchildren, and they're all wonderful.
Oh.
Yeah, they're
Also not rotten. No.
They're not rotten. They are really interesting, nice people.
Oh, good.
I've got 2 granddaughters. My children had children. Their first children were daughters, and they were born a month and a half apart.
Oh, wow.
And the second children, there's a boy and a girl, and they were born a week apart. So they're all together.
There's a term for that. That's a Southern term. I can't remember what that's.
Is there?
Yeah, I can't remember what that's called.
Anyway.
They're cousins that are really. There's some.
Yeah, there's something.
I can't think of the term, but
It's,
anyway.
it's nice because, and they're all really smart, of course, and really cute, and beautiful. And the 2 older ones are in college,
Oh, nice.
and they just turned 20. I couldn't believe it. I said 20. Oh my gosh.
Time flies.
Yeah, but one
It
of
really
them
does.
is studying Arabic
Mhm.
and going to Tunisia next year for her junior year abroad because she's studying Mideast International Studies.
Oh, that's nice.
And my other one is she writes. She's a poet and she's politically active,
Oh, good.
and she's going to work for the Cleveland Symphony this summer,
Oh, wow.
writing.
Wow.
But she was a very big Bernie Sanders supporter, and in fact she ended up in Ohio. She lived in Toledo, and the Secretary of State there decided to change the rules about young people voting a week before the primary, and he said, we have been assuming that if you're 18 by the time of the general election, you can vote in the primary. Well, he decided that wasn't true, and so that he wasn't going to let people who weren't 18 already vote in the primary. Now, my granddaughter was going to be 18 the day after the primary.
Oh, wow.
So the ACLU and some other groups filed a lawsuit against the Secretary of State, and they needed plaintiffs. And my granddaughter was one of the 7 plaintiffs in that lawsuit, and she won, and she got to vote.
Oh, nice.
So that bodes well for her civic involvement.
Well, yeah. I mean, that also is just, maybe a good ending note that, you can do something. You
Well,
can
I
make
think,
a difference. I think that's important.
and as I said, I really think, I was just at a luncheon today, and we were talking about what's going to happen with the hospital here, and we all think, really, they're just going to tear it down? Nobody asked us. And I said, well, we should raise our voice, and we're going to do that, and we will make at least a public statement. There are about 20 people. They're pretty interesting people, and who knows who else will chime in. And maybe we'll have a blue ribbon committee or somebody look at what might happen to that property there. That would be very inclusive and not just an inner circle of things.
Well, maybe
But-
now that my hands aren't tied and my mouth isn't,
Yes, I
maybe
understand.
I can join something like that
Yeah.
now.
So anyway, I just think that we have to look for ways in which we can address the issues that bother us instead
Yeah.
of grumping about them.
That's right. That's absolutely right. I think that's
And
perfect.
frankly, I feel uncomfortable when I see something happen and I can't feel a way to fix it,
Yeah.
which is really arrogant of me, I know.
Well, yeah, no, I get that.
Yeah.
Like I alone
Yeah,
can save
but
everything.
I do know that if you work with lots, if you don't say anything, nobody will hear it.
Right.
If
I
you don't do
also-
something, nothing will happen.
I also have found that sometimes sometimes there are people, they don't know, or they don't
Mostly,
realize.
yes.
They don't realize that this is a
Absolutely.
problem or why. And sometimes having a person, stand up and say, this is why this is a problem, I've seen that change
Yes,
things.
believe me, it changes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, on that note, I'm not sure how long we recorded for, but thank you so much this has been an honor and a pleasure, and I appreciate you sharing your
you,
story. And I always love chatting with you, and we've been saying that we wanted to try to have lunch for a while, and this was a perfect. Thank you for the tea and the snacks,
the
and
little bits of
it was very good, and I just appreciate you. Thanks.
Oh, wonderful! Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. I hope I helped. I hope I was coherent.
You were perfect.